What's poppin', y'all? In what is arguably, and I would probably say one of, if not the most interesting and crazy story in hip hop history, is completely being overlooked. So this comes back to Pras Mikel, who was a member of the Fugees. Fugees, legendary group from the 90s. He wasn't as big as the two other stars would later on become, who was Lauryn Hill and Wyclef Jean. However, he was still a member nonetheless, and he just got found guilty and faces up to 22 years in sentencing for what was the biggest headline was his charge as working as an unregistered agent of the People's Republic of China. This went everywhere. Also, the thing that got the most attention was when he testified on his own behalf, saying he was an FBI informant. And then people like 50 Cent said, "I knew this fool was a rat. I'm glad I never effed with this guy." And everyone pretty much just thinks that, this guy he's been telling, everyone's like, this is hip hop police, man, who knows how many rappers he was snitching on. This is rap in this case is like an ant. It's absolutely meaningless. It has nothing to do with hip hop crimes, anything of the like. This is so much bigger than that. And I'm just going to try to give you guys all of the details because this is the craziest story that you've heard this year. It's easily the craziest story I've heard. And we're talking, this goes to Obama, to Trump, to China, to everything, to billions upon billions of dollars. And I thought I was just going to get here and talk about, this guy just got arrested. He was telling on people. But when I went down the rabbit hole, which was like a 6 to 8 hour rabbit hole, I found out so much more information. So let's start from the beginning, right? So after Pras, we're going to ignore the whole Fugees thing. So after Pras is done with the Fugees have kind of separated. Pras became like a documentary filmmaker after he released his first solo album, which was in 1998. So we're around 2006. So he released a documentary film where he went undercover for 9 days on Skid Row. He was sleeping in tents, stuff like that. After that, he wanted to get out of LA. So he moved to New York City and he got a call from a big nightlife promoter who wanted to ask a favor for him. The nightlife promoter wanted Pras to entertain a new whale at PM, which is a club in the meatpacking district. A whale, for those who are unfamiliar, it's a term for somebody that's got an insanely large amount of money and is willing to spend it. So the whale for that night was a 24-year-old person from Malaysia, young male, who didn't know any celebrities, but he had a ton of money. Pras reluctantly agreed. He didn't like clubs at all, but he went. At the club, a bunch of Wall Street bros were yelling on the mic saying, "We're the richest people in this club," and bought drinks for everyone to celebrate. But the 24-year-old, whose name is Jho Low, didn't appreciate that. So he handed the MC $20,000 in cash to get the mic, and he took over the stage saying, "There's rumors that someone is running around here talking about how they're the richest people in this club. So I'll tell you what, I want to buy everyone in this club a bottle," which was probably around like $3,000 each. The bankers then added another round trying to match him, which led to Low spending another $20K to get the mic, and he wasn't with the back and forth. So what he did was said he was going to buy every single bottle with liquid in it in the entire club and demanded someone head across the street to the other club and buy a bottle for everyone partying in that club as well. And Pras, just witnessing this, estimated that Jho Low, at 24 years old, had just spent at least $1 million, if not $1.5 million in one night. Pras would be reached out to again to perform in Malaysia for Jho Low, which he refused to do. He said he never took money from Low for any performances regarding music. However, Pras' interests were slowly shifting. He was interested in Barack Obama, who he had met once when Obama was still an Illinois senator. He was invited to a rally in downtown LA in 2007, and he wanted to donate, but the amount was $40,000 per person. He couldn't afford that, so he told Obama, "Hey man, I'll catch you at the next one." But Obama told him to just come anyway. At this point, he was full on in on Obama's election. He wanted Obama to win the presidency. He was telling everyone about it, and word eventually got back to Low, who reached out again in 2012. By now, Jho Low was at the top of the world with celebrities through different means. So a little bit of background on Jho Low. He's from Malaysia. His grandfather is Chinese, from China, and they were very rich. However, Jho Low is accused of embezzling over $5 billion from a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund and bribing government officials in that country to keep quiet. Some of them, like for example, Najib Razak, who was the former prime minister of Malaysia, was sentenced for this crime, the money laundering scheme. That's just a little bit of background information. So he bribed government officials to keep quiet about it, and then he found some Goldman Sachs bankers who would help or turn a blind eye to his movement of said money as long as they got a piece. Just to give you guys some perspective, Jho Low was boys with Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese. Leonardo DiCaprio was testifying during this case. If you guys probably saw the headline, Leonardo DiCaprio testifies at court for a rapper, that was this case. He was dating a Victoria's Secret model, Miranda Kerr, this is Jho Low, who is currently married to the CEO of Snapchat, and he funded the movie Wolf of Wall Street with the initial funding of $100 million. At one point, he even acquired a $100 million stake in Sony Music Publishing, but in order to keep his embezzlement going, he needed some people inside the US government. So in the same way that he threw money around in Malaysia and then Hollywood, he was probably like, hey, this is just how it is, he thought he could do the same in the US. So it's 2012, and Praz was invited by Frank White Jr., a higher-up of Obama's re-election campaign, to an event in Miami, where for another $40,000, people could pretty much be around each other and the president. When Low found out about this, he made plans to accompany Praz, wiring him $1 million. Praz invited his contacts and covered their donations with that money. So there was some illegal stuff going on here. A foreign national, Malaysian, Jho Low, sending political contributions to the US, that money being distributed among friends to donate under their own name, which is something called straw donors, and later misleading the campaign about where that money had come from. This was, according to the Justice Department, a conspiracy to circumvent federal law against foreign influence to buy access to Obama. But another interpretation, according to the defense that Praz put up, is that Jho Low and Praz, both not knowing the rules of the Federal Election Committee, were just using each other to achieve their own goals. Praz wanted Obama to win the election. This guy had money. Jho Low, from his own experience in Malaysia and some of the Middle East, found that politicians had a price, and he believed the same in the US. Low still hadn't met Obama, and part of the reason is the campaign didn't really like him because Jho Low had this party reputation with all these celebrities and stuff like that, and they're like, this probably isn't great for the brand. But it's 2012, and they were saying that Frank White Jr. guided Low through the White House and got his picture taken with the president and the first lady, with motions stating that White, quote-unquote, facilitated a $20 million payment for this photograph. So Praz was pretty much boys with Low now, hanging out at all the big parties, events, and places that Low was at. Things were great until 2016. The Attorney General of the U.S. seized about $1 billion in assets from the sovereign wealth fund that Low had used: real estate, his private jet, a Van Gogh and Monet painting, his $100 million share in Sony Music, the proceeds from Wolf of Wall Street. Leonardo DiCaprio and Miranda Kerr both surrendered over millions of dollars in gifts, one of those gifts being a very rare, I think a $9 million Basquiat that Leonardo DiCaprio had. So Low was in trouble with Malaysia. He was facing charges there. And he was also now in trouble with the US. So he opted to link up with China, where he's been ever since. In 2017, with the Trump presidency going on, Praz was reached out to by Low for some help. He wanted somebody close to Trump who could basically pull the Justice Department back from pursuing charges against Low, which is where the current charges that Praz was found guilty of come from. They said that they both organized a private group of citizens who, for millions of dollars from that fund, agreed to lobby the Trump administration on Low's behalf and then went into lobbying on China's behalf, which led to Praz charged with those crimes and witness tampering, violating FARA, which is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which pretty much means that someone has to publicly sign up and make it clear that they're representing foreign interests. And also, he got charged with acting as an agent of a foreign government. The issue with the FARA charge, or FARA Act, is that what if he doesn't know that he's operating under foreign interests? Maybe that wasn't his intention. And that's where the case gets a little bit messy when you start to look at it and you kind of start to feel bad for Praz. But in 2017, this hadn't come to fruition. Praz reached out to a friend, Nikki Lum Davis, who was a big Republican donor, who then reached out to Elliot Broidy, who was vice chair of the Trump Victory Committee and deputy finance chair of the Republican National Committee. So in 2017, the group drew up a contract to secure Broidy's services to lobby the Department of Justice on Low's behalf. $8 million up front and $75 million if the problem was handled within 6 months. $50 million if it took a year. Another individual, George Higginbotham, who was then working for the Justice Department, allegedly set up 2 shell companies to receive payments from Low, $25 million up front and $300 million when the job was done, that would be distributed among everyone later. So now it's Brody, Jho Low, and Praz meeting at the Shangri-La Hotel in Bangkok, Thailand. Brody told him that he would make sure the Trump administration would end the investigation and the asset seizures. Low was willing to hand money to anyone connected to Trump to handle this problem, from people like Chris Christie to Trump's personal lawyer, Mark Kasowitz. But this is where it becomes USA versus China. Right now, it's just Jho Low trying to get the government pretty much their foot off his back so he could continue living the life that he was living in the US. So 2 weeks after the trip to Bangkok, Davis, Nikki, Brody, and Praz flew to Hong Kong to meet Low again. When they arrived, they were taken to Shenzhen, China, where they were accompanied by a Chinese government official, Sun Lijun. Lijun would ask Brody if he could convince the White House to extradite Chinese billionaire Guo Wengui. Please forgive my Chinese pronunciation, I don't understand Chinese. Or also known as Miles Guo. So he was living as a fugitive from China in the US since 2015, and he was living lavish. He had like an $82 million penthouse in Manhattan, and he was creating a lot of bad anti-China sentiments towards Beijing and a lot of bad press for China. They weren't happy with this. Interpol had even issued a notice for his arrest on bribery charges in China and to extradite him for these crimes, but the US government just let him stay. So Lijun told them that he would be going to Washington to discuss the Guo problem with senior Trump officials. Brody said he would help, but weeks later, Praz found out that Brody didn't follow through with the promise. So Praz received some cryptic messages where he was staying and instructions in New York City, which eventually led him down into a hotel room with 2 Chinese men in suits, one of which was Lijun cursing at Praz because he had been refused a meeting with Trump that Brody promised. He was in New York because he wanted the U.S. to turn over their fugitive, Guo, and the U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions wanted Lijun to send back 3 detained Americans, and he showed him the email. Praz knew he was in way over his head at this point, but Lijun asked him what he would do if he were him, and Praz urged him to at least return pregnant woman that was detained. So he got on a phone call. After the phone call, he said it would be done, but Praz asked who the phone call was with, and Lijun said Xi Jinping, the president of China, and that was the only person he said he reported to. Later that year, the FBI woke up to Praz while he was eating at a restaurant. They told him he wasn't in trouble, and they took out a bunch of headshots and asked if he knew any of these people and if he had met with any Chinese officials at the Four Seasons lately. He told them yes, and he pointed out the headshot of Lijun. He told them what they talked about, and the FBI's jaw dropped. They were shocked. They had no idea how the woman even ended up sent back to the USA. They just found her in New York, and they're like, how did she get here? Who negotiated for her? What did they get? They didn't know any of this was going on. And this is the part where the FBI informant thing comes in, because Praz goes up and tells them, hey, I was helping the FBI, and I attended multiple meetings after this incident to explain to them what happened. This guy basically got an American citizen brought back for pretty much nothing, and everyone's calling him an FBI informant. This is the informing that he did. He told them what happened in the situation. Prior to this, he had no involvement whatsoever with the FBI. But therein lies a problem. The government used this and said that Praz, his willingness to talk with Lijun about these topics is proof of the conspiracy that he's charged with, that he was just found guilty of, and it shows that he was not only violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act, but knowingly acted as an agent of Chinese influence. And Praz's troubles really began in November 28th, where this article quotes, when the government, through the constitutionally debatable authority known as civil asset forfeiture, seized about $74 million from him that was held in 4 separate bank accounts. These included a trust account held by his then lawyer, who was moonlighting for Praz, advising him on these schemes involving the Department of Justice, while, get this, simultaneously working a day job at the Department of Justice. The water came to a full boil in May 2019 with the first indictment on 4 criminal counts for illegal contributions to the 2012 Obama re-election campaign. The government offered Praz a deal. If he pleaded guilty, they would return a small fraction of the total seized, and his problems would go away. He refused the offer. He didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. 2 years later, in what his defense team argues was a clear act of governmental and prosecutorial misconduct, the government slammed Praz with a superseding indictment that added 8 more criminal charges, including bank fraud, concealment of material facts, witness tampering, violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and working as an unregistered agent of the People's Republic of China. The problem is, everyone else is done now. Frank White Jr., who helped facilitate the photo with Obama, faced no charges. Nikki Lum Davis and George Higginbotham, if you remember, Nikki Lum Davis is who connected Praz to George Higginbotham, and she was also there with them in Hong Kong, China. They were part of the arranging of the Bangkok trip. Both of them pled guilty to lesser charges. Nikki got maybe like 2 years, I think. George Higginbotham, I don't know if he was charged yet, but they were saying he wouldn't get more than 16 months. Brody got pardoned before Trump left, and others, like for example Steve Wynn, they got granted immunity. So the problem with all of this, Praz's co-defendant in this case is Jho Low, who they can't prosecute because he's protected by China and living there. And the other problem is that he didn't take the plea deal. They offered him that deal in 2019, where if he just gave them a small amount of money that the government seized, everything would go away. But he refused because he thought, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. And when you get the full context of this, I don't think he did anything wrong. Sure, he was accepting an exorbitant amount of money for certain things, but was his intention the crimes that they're saying he committed? His intention was to help Obama get reelected, which he did. I mean, at least contributed to it with a lot of money. He was friends with Jho Low, which so was Miranda Kerr, or she was dating him. So was Martin Scorsese. So was Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio got at least $15 million worth of things from him as well. Same thing as Praz. So why does Praz get screwed in this situation? Realistically, he should have taken the plea deal, of course. We're probably all saying that. He wouldn't have even gotten time, which is mind-blowing, and now he can be sentenced to 22 years, up to 22 years. I think they want to smack him upside the head because they're probably looking at him like, yo, what the hell are you thinking going up against the federal government in a case that pretty much transcends politics? This is like international foreign relations at this point. Because here, get this. Remember when I said Miles Guo, the guy who was already wanted by Interpol through China? They said they wanted to bring him there so they could arrest him and charge him with certain crimes or fraud or something like that. Well, Miles Guo, just a couple of weeks ago, got charged and denied bail for a $1 billion fraud in the U.S. So this guy's, now he's arrested in the U.S., he's without bail, and he's pretty much facing big charges. And get this too, remember the guy Li Jun that they had met with, the Chinese guy? Well, he got sentenced to death in China for charges of bribery and corruption. They said that he accepted money and property worth over $95 million in USD, but in China. And then he pretty much got a suspended death sentence that could be life in prison as well, with no parole. This is a mess. This is an actual movie, if you think about it. All of these different characters. You've got people in Hollywood. You've got the president of China and the guy that was reporting to the president of China. You've got Trump. You've got Obama, who albeit wasn't really involved, and I will give credit, like the Obama administration were the ones that were pursuing this. They're like, yo, what the hell is going on here? Where is this money coming from, etc. Probably the biggest lesson to learn from this is all of these people are corrupt, especially politicians. Do you see the amount of money that's getting thrown around? We're talking $10 million, $20 million for a photo? That's mind-blowing money. But yeah, Praz is not some hip-hop police FBI informant. He assisted the FBI, which probably screwed him because they had proof now that, oh, hey, this guy was working with China, or he spoke to Chinese people even though he got this woman released. I honestly feel bad for the dude. I think he didn't even know what he was involved in. He didn't even know that he had to register as a foreign agent. And I think the government just railroaded him because, yeah, now they can't get Jho Low, who is pretty much probably just going to stay chilling in China for the foreseeable future. So China pretty much wanted Miles, and the U.S. wanted Jho Low, and you have kind of like this tension that was going on with this whole case. Let me know what y'all think about this in the comments. There are so much details surrounding this that I could have been sitting here for at least an hour just involving Praz, but if we went through the whole web of this thing, probably be here for 10 hours, and I didn't even research that far into the whole fraud if we're talking about big companies, big oil companies, all of that other stuff. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you enjoyed. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for watching. Peace.